Hello and welcome to the United Devil with me, JB. So I've done one of these a couple of days ago and something that I really enjoyed doing it. So even if it's just for me, any opportunity to talk about this club. And now I think one of the things for me is really important. I've not seen many other people do this sort of thing, but again, you know, I'm sure it is there. But it's a privilege for me to kind of go over and look back at the past. This transfer window for me hasn't been, I don't think, been particularly great, and it's just something that kind of amuses me. And any opportunity to relive some of the best times of my life, I'll take that with both handed. No sound apparently. Let me see what I can do. Any sound now? Audio output. Is that better? Does that work? Do we now have sound? I might have to start that again. So, welcome to the United Devil channel. Does that work? With me, JB. So let's do we now have sound again? I might have to start that again. One of these the other day, and for me, welcome to the United Devil channel. Talking about the club and an opportunity to talk about past intro. Again. Awesome. So an opportunity to talk about the past, talk about pivotal point in for me, my life. I really talking about the club and an opportunity to talk about past when you're born, but I was very lucky. Awesome. Enough. So an opportunity to talk about the past, talk about pivotal point in my life, and I was really fortunate. Well, you can't really dictate when you're born, but I was very lucky. Is that better? Has that finally fixed it? Let's see if that's fixed it. Hopefully it has fixed it. Still, hi Bobby, how are we all doing today? Am I still talking twice? Honestly. Better. Okay, awesome, cool. Okay, if I am talking twice, then yeah, let me know. Still, hopefully, cool. So hopefully all good. So, Jesus, let's try this again, shall we? Hello in the chat to Bobby, to Danny B, Man Latata, legends of the chat already. So today again, I wanted to go through, and this is a little bit of a light window. I was very fortunate, as I say, like some of you guys, to kind of live through this era. I lived right through the Fergie years, pretty much right through the Premier League. So I was very fortunate to live through this era. So whilst the transfer window is shaping up, on the show this morning was a little bit of a rant, but I wanted to kind of go back to yesteryear and kind of look at and see some of the players as well that you may have forgotten about, and just basically an opportunity for us to talk about all things about this club. So 93-94 again was I enjoyed that year. Should I get my stuff up? And yeah, I was really in my school years then. I was I'd pretty much at the end of that season started secondary school. We won the title. Again, got through to Champions League. So this is totally my era. Songs, the sights, the sounds, the smells, absolutely fantastic. So 93-94 window was a little bit quiet. I think unless you go back and you look at it, you'd be led to believe that United during these kind of early years, literally went and bought a team. We actually didn't. we as a club, we were very fortunate to obviously have the class of '92 come through, and then start having some of the others come through as well. But the misconception really about that time is that we just went out and bought loads and loads of players. We did go and pretty much try and buy the best player, but it was only in the later windows that we started to supplement with more players, because the competitions were bigger and the squads were bigger. But during these first couple of years, Ferguson was trying to maintain a winning team, and then also kind of trying to get some winners in. So we can kind of look at the players who came in. Pretty much one player came in, and then we can kind of look at those sort of older players who left. So obviously, as we all know, and I'm not going to mess up this time, I want to start off with the kits as I love to. So basically, these were the kits. We maintain the gold and green one. That was one of my favourite kits. I think the red one pretty much stayed the same, but I absolutely love that black kit. That view cam kit for me was one of my favourites. It's up there, and also the goalkeeper top as well. Now some people may dislike that sort of. See if I can make this a little bit bigger. Some people may not sort of like that that black kit or that keeper top, but I absolutely love it. You can see if I can make it a little bit bigger. Here we go, that's better. So I really did love that. Keeper top pretty much had all of these as well. One of 4 boys, so God knows how much it used to cost. Used to cost my parents. So hopefully you can see that on screen, and if not, let me know. There we go, perfect. So these were some of my favourite kits. I loved that keeper top. I again spent plenty of hours up park from morning until evening, pretending to be Erwin. So this time for me was a fantastic time, and these kits, they represent more than just football shirts. Every new kit was an event, these kits I can almost smell and taste exactly where I was at the time of these particular kits. So on to, I guess, the main event of this one is the main man, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. Played for the club over 400 times, 479 times he played for this club. He scored 51 goals, 41 assists. Not bad for a player who basically was a midfield combatant. He was a leader in the truest sense of the word. Now, when we say leaders nowadays, I think we underestimate in terms of a football pitch what that means. And he was just an all-round. He was just an all-round legend of the club, and that word gets bandied around a lot. So we are talking about Roy Keane. I'd love to know your thoughts on what you remember about Keane, but signing this young Irish kid from Forest for a 3.75 from Forest millions, 3.75 millions, and just as it transpires, an absolute bargain. Now, Roy Keane, when you're looking at his sort of past, and kind of he didn't come through early days, so he sort of was in Ireland. If you listen to him interview and some of the things that he said about his past, he basically didn't sort of come through. He didn't think he was going to make it, and he only really come over when he was 18. And luckily enough for him, Forest, picked him up, and he had his schooling there with the likes of Stuart Pearce, I think Ian Wone. Can't remember who else was there at the time, not being a massive Forest fan. but he got taught by probably some of the hard men in the game, and I think that probably shaped him and who he was. In the early days for Forest, he was kind of more of a centre back. He kind of played in multiple positions: centre back, centre midfield, a midfield player. But he always had that attitude. Now, I don't know if Fergie really saw that in him. He obviously saw a combative midfielder, but was it luck or judgment? I think the judgment was good, but I don't even think that he could have envisioned the sort of player that Keane would become. So 479 games, 51 goals. I mean, some of the goals. I can't remember how many red cards. I should have put that stat down, to be fair. I think it's something like 9 or 10 red cards. I remember the Haaland one, the Shearer one. There was times where there was a game where he basically got sent off for just chucking a ball at somebody. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was a hothead. Now, at that aside, and you're looking at the games where he'd clash with Vieira, he'd clash with all sorts of hard men. I do remember a particular game with Vinnie Jones where I think he was a little bit quiet. I think he was always a little bit scared of Vinnie Jones, to be fair. But other than that, you'd never see him shy away from a tackle, never see him shy away from defending his team. Also, what people forget about Roy Keane is, as a footballer, first class. People don't, unless you live that time or you really watch him play. At times, he was world class. Like, we're not talking about somebody that used to run around the pitch and just steam into people, and that was his game. That was part of his game, but the other part of his game was a midfield engine. He was tenacious, tackling. He was a great passer of the ball. His positioning. Keane's very underrated, which is amazing, because people forget, and it's almost like when if I'm asked about somebody of the 70s that I never watched playing in, I go back and try and watch clips of those. You can't really get a sense of what this player was. Proper box to box. When you're talking about a modern day box to box player who had everything, you're talking about Keane. You if you'd never watched him play. One of the games, and obviously this is the most obvious game for me that summed him up, was the Juventus game. Now, Roy Keane didn't play in the final that year, and the reason he didn't play in the final was because he picked up the card. But we were losing that final, and if it wasn't for Keane coming in with that header, and that was probably one of the best games I've ever seen him play. He literally grabbed that Juventus game by the scruff of the neck, and we're talking Conte, Zidane was playing in that game. We are talking. I can't remember who was in that game. In fact, I might even let's have a little look, because you seriously need to know Juventus 99 team. Yeah, so the likes of Zidane was in that team, Conte was in that team, Ferrero, Montero, Tudor, so Davies was in that team as well. Del Piero was in that team. Inzaghi was in that team. Now we're talking Italy 90s defenders. I know it was the back end of the 90s, but we are talking about Italy in the 90s, and defensively, that one of the best defensive leagues in the world, the best defenders, and Roy Keane took that game by the scruff of the neck, sacrificed his own personal achievements, and got us through to the final. And that epitomised, that final for me epitomised everything that he was about. And if you listen to some interviews after, and of course we can talk about the run of 2005. But if you watch interviews with him, one thing I've always admired about Roy Keane more than anything else was playing football, as much as it was a privilege for him, it was a job. And what I mean by that is that him doing his best for his teammates, him winning for the fans, him winning for the team, him doing his best wasn't for accolades. It wasn't because he was trying to be a superstar. It was his job. And as he puts it, if you were like a postman, or if you were a cleaner, or whatever you did in life, football was his job, and he's prepared to leave it all on the pitch because that is what he should have done. Not necessarily for the money. Obviously, I'm sure he's not going to say no to some pound notes, but everything he did was because it was his job. And then when he left the club, he's not a United supporter. That's been established. He's not the biggest Fergie supporter either. So also one of the things that I really like about Keane is that even though he's a maverick, right? He speaks his mind, backs it up on the pitch, backs it up, and he has his opinion, and again, much like what I try to do here, is that the world and his wife, including me, think Ferguson is an absolute legend, is a god. We don't know what he was like, but Keane has a different viewpoint on that. He doesn't think that. He has a lot to say on Fergie, and that's such a good example of where you can where people and views can overlap the best for the club or what you're trying to do. You're working towards the same goal, but you can have a difference of opinion, but you still respect each other, and you kind of still do your job, and all you want to do is the best for the club. Keane, what else did he bring? So not only did he bring the fire, he was a leader on the pitch. He was Ferguson's extension on the pitch, a winner. Whether or not, I don't necessarily know in his brain if that's what he set out to do, but a winner in terms of doing his best. He led by example. He didn't suffer fools. Now, when you listen to him about the sort of players that he likes, and the eras that he sort of went through, he came through. He was the last of that old school type of player, that kind of cast in iron, kind of cleaning people's boots, that sort of hard school of knocks. Then what he was able to do was sort of transition into this modern game as well, because he was so good, and his box to box, his attributes were so good, and then as he got older and a bit slower, he could sort of then mop up a little bit. But he managed to go through different eras. He left in 2005, which is ridiculous now. But he kind of managed to come to that sort of older era, and then sort of come through into kind of like the mid noughties, where football really did start to change. He was an inspiration to those kids coming through. So we talk about the class of '92, and we talk about. We were very fortunate, we had Beckham, we had Giggs, we had, everyone else. But if you listen to those guys and you talk to them all, the one constant that they talk about in that room is the leadership of Keane. You can still see to this day how much they respect him, and that's almost the one of the most important things about Keane is that the legacy that he continued. So for me, he's probably the last of that legacy player. So you had the Robsons before him, the Bruces, the Pallisters, the Irwins, and Keane came in with those guys. Being a young guy himself, he came in amongst all of those players, held his own, and then learnt from those and passed that down. So he was, to me, the one of our last links to that kind of past era of. And I'm not saying that it was the best era necessarily, but for a mindset and to be able to have a dressing room full of respect and kind of pass the values down. And I'm talking about values that we should hold today, values of respect, of you do your best in whatever you do. You particularly in football, you're there for your teammates. You do your best on the pitch. You do the best for the fans, and you do your job. Now, when Keane left, of course, you still had those values in the likes of Scholesy. Neville was still there. You still had those sorts of players, but we lost that. We lost that engine. I feel that when Keane left, we lost that. We lost the history, and we sort of lost that last leader. I sort of think Rooney channeled that a bit, but Keane was that last sort of linchpin, and when he went, you could then start to see that we never replaced him. We never really, that those values that we had kind of started to erode away. And then obviously when people like Carrick, Scholesy, the Nevilles, and they started to go again, we never transitioned that attitude of players on. Keane, his greatest hits, obviously Juventus wise, we're that was probably for me one of the greatest games that I watched. One of the greatest games in terms of an actual watch of a game, obviously the 99 final, I'll never forget that. As a game, that was crap. It was an awful game. The ending of the game was the best. Watching Keane, for me, coming out in his suit, not being involved in that final, was a heartbreaker. But again, he sacrificed himself. Obviously, you had the Haaland tackle, whereby I think it was 97 or 98, where I think we played City, and Keane did his ligament in his knee, and I believe the tale is that Haaland stood over him or was laughing away or did something that stuck in Keane's mind. So being Keane, waiting for his opportunity. There was an opportunity, I think it was Leeds, 2001. And the first chance he got, he absolutely took Haaland out. I mean, he pretty much finished his career. Nowadays, I 100% don't agree with that tackle. It's you look back now and it was of a time and an era, but that's the sort of player that Keane was. Is you had an all or nothing, wanted to win at all costs. Didn't sometimes he'd lose his head, but it was all about respect. And I still think to this day it's one of the reasons why Haaland went to City. Can we say that? Can I say that with some conviction? Probably, yeah. But and then he did the infamous MUTV interview about the players, about how bad they were. They were awful, and Keane kind of just sort of let loose. I don't know if him and Fergie at that time had started to break down. I think he wanted out of the club. Absolutely gutted. Watching being a young guy myself, and then being a kid, watching this young guy come through. He was the captain. You almost felt invincible. You almost felt like you'd won on the pitch even before you'd played the game. So you brought all that, and then just to sort of not have him there anymore was a really hard one to take. And I remember a couple of players who left, like Beckham left. That was a hard one. But Keane for me was the one that I thought, this one's really tough to take. And it just went on to show the ruthlessness of Ferguson, to get rid of his general on the pitch. He was an absolute amazing, and when we say legend, he is up there. He is a legend of this club. 7 league wins, in itself speaks a lot. Obviously he missed the first one. but to win 7 league titles is no mean feat, you know, an absolute, and to be a captain and just win those is immense. Won Champions League, even though he himself passed, has also said that doesn't count for him because he didn't play in the final, but you know, I guess he did play a major part in that, so if it wasn't for him we probably wouldn't be there. So I think he's doing himself a disservice there. For FA Cups, you know, I pretty much winning everything you can win in the game. Couple of teams of the seasons, you know, I probably would even say that 99 he could have won, he should have won the Ballon d'Or. I might be alone in that opinion, but you know, midfielders didn't typically win those sorts of things. But for me, you know, he was the player for me of that era. So that was pretty much our only major signing. I think there's a couple of other players that we can talk about. So, I mean, if you want to get in the chat with your memories of Keane, if you remember seeing him play, if you didn't, you know, what are your perceptions of him? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? You know, again, or I think having as many views, you know, with the annals of time, sometimes your opinion or my opinion it can get a little bit lost, because you know, you look back from the eyes of a man into the eyes of a boy, and sometimes you sort of, that gets lost. But for me, you know, Keane was the guy. In terms of incomings that season, that pretty much was the only incoming of that season. The other highlight, I'm going to mention them just pretty much just because they sort of come through. There was one other. Robbie Savage came through. I don't have a picture of him because he pretty much didn't play. He went on loan. So it's just to mention that he come through from the under 18s, and you know, he was on loan, and there's not really much to say about him. But Savage, yeah, he come through the under 21s, and yeah, that's pretty much all I can say about that. Now the other one that came through of that year, I'm just trying to see if I don't actually think I've got a picture of him up. That is gonna bug me now. I'm gonna have to do it live. So if we get there before me, this player played 384 times, scoring 8 goals and providing 20 assists. He left to go to Everton. We sold him for 4.75 million, and his brother obviously thinks he's the president of football. And of course, we are talking about none other than Philip Neville. So Philip Neville coming through that year, under 18s, a little bit younger, obviously, than his brother. And I have to say, as a versatile kind of centre back at times, he could play anywhere along the back. He could play centre midfield, a defensive kind of midfielder. Definitely of that mould whereby, you know, a kind of versatile player that Fergie liked. He liked that sort of O'Shea type of player, that Fletcher sort of player, you know, that player that could play multiple positions, could do a job for the team. And you know, I a lot of time for him, a lot of respect. You can argue that is he the better Neville? I think he was the more talented Neville, if talent is a thing there. But I think Gary probably Arsenal for life. Welcome here. Underrated, definitely. I'd agree with that. Very versatile player. I really like Phil Neville. Again, I was always gutted when players left, particularly players like Nicky Butt and him, because they come through when I was a kid, and it was almost like watching your mates come play through, get into the team, and then they get so I was really attached to these players. Neville, as I said, played 384 games, which is nothing to be sniffed at. 8 goals and 20 assists. 20 assists is not bad whatsoever. And then, of course, then he went to the Toffees and had a very good career. So I take my hat off to him, because he could have just stayed there, but like so much of these players, they had that oomph, and they had that drive. You come through in that United team, and you knew you were a good player, because you didn't come through, you didn't stay there unless you were a good player. So great player, not quite a legend of the club as such. You could have a different opinion on that. Not quite a legend to me, but definitely somebody who I was just like an absolute amazing player. Now we're going to talk about some outs from the era. Now, a lot of these players you probably won't remember, depending on what age you actually are. I remember the majority of them, and these are players we're going back when they're coming through it as an under 18 in the 90s, signing in 89. Now I as I say, I've got a poster coming that was I'm going to say it again, I'm going to keep saying this until the poster is up. I had a 91-92 team poster with most of these players in there, and the moment I put it up, the very next season we won the league, and then we did the double, and then we went on. It was only until that poster came down that we kind of started to not win as much. So I'm taking credit for the era because of this poster, and you watch when it goes up again, we will win the league again. So you just need to bear that. You just need to bear that in mind. I say, in jest. So, first player out. This player won 2 Premier Leagues. Unbelievably, this player won 2 Premier Leagues. And some may say, Keane himself will say that he stole a career and only had a career because of his dad. And of course, we are talking about Darren Ferguson. Unbelievably, Darren Ferguson won 2 Premier Leagues, and that's not a joke. I remember him clearly. I remember just purely because he was the boss's son. From what I remember of him, he played. Let me go back a second before I'm about to say what I'm about to say. Played 29 games in his career. He come through in 1990 as an under 21 player. So, but again, a youth player. We always like to have youth players in the team, and what we have done, which to me is what makes his club fantastic. Come through in 1990. And then eventually sold to Wolves for about 250,000 in this season. Played 29 goals. Centre midfielder, didn't really play a lot. Won 2 Premier Leagues, and I need to prefix, he won 2 Premier Leagues. Was Darren Ferguson, obviously the boss's son. I remember watching him in a couple of games. Not being enthralled. He was the type of player for me that, when you had your favourite players and you didn't want them to come on, and you knew Ferguson was in the team, he was really disappointed. And even back then, even at a young age of about 10, 11, you already knew who the good and bad players were. So you sort of could get a sense of feeling about not being excited about every player, and knowing that actually, some of these players are there to do a job. And for me, he was that player. You knew he was like the manager's son. And for me, it was the first favoritism moment whereby you kind of like in your life, well, actually some people only get so far in life because of who they know. And then when you're the boss's son, basically gifting you to Premier Leagues. What more can you ask for, really? So we sold him to Wolves. I don't really know much about his career after that. Can't really say many people do, unless you're a Ferguson player supporter. But again, not as talented as his dad. Fergie, people forget about him. Rangers, he was an up and coming striker. It was only through injury that he didn't play, but he was an up and coming striker. But Ferguson Jr. Basically was in the right place at the right time, and his dad managed to get him two leagues. So good on him. Good on him. So the next player, again, I think he was a fan favourite player. Again, from that legacy, 89, he was signed from Southampton for 1.2 million. Really quick player. I really liked him. I remember him, one of those players. So when you're young, all right, and I used to love the players who had speed, right? So there's a player, Aston Villa had one. I can't remember his name now, but he had I can't remember his name. I'll find out his name. But he was quick, and I was always drawn to really quick, fast plays. Those electric plays that had that pace. You'd be bombing down the wing, and he was one of the first wingers that I remember. Bit of pace, and just fantastic player. And I think very underrated as well was Danny Wallace. I like Danny Wallace a lot. I remember watching sort of 3 o'clock games on Grandstand. It was a UK sports show where you'd get the games on a Saturday, and I remember watching this guy, probably one of the first wingers that I kind of saw with pace. And yeah, he played 71 times, scored 11 goals, assisted 2. And stayed from 89 until this season. Got sold for 250,000 to Birmingham. So not prolific by any means in terms of playing time, prolific in terms of goals, but he was a very versatile player who was a winger, but again stayed because he was needed by the club. What wanted, I guess, like so many of these players on this list, who stayed for more years than you would have thought, but they did really well. And what you find looking back now and looking through this list is that these players were victim of success. They were victim of Fergie coming in and just getting these players to do a job for him, but then quickly figuring out that they weren't the sort of players for him. In probably in any other club, if this was the 80s, he probably would have stayed longer. But they were players who came into almost. So when Fergie came into the club, you had a culture that Ferguson needed to get rid of. So you had the McGraths and you had the Whitesides. I don't know if that's fair to say that, but there was a culture. There was a drinking culture, and that wasn't just across us. That was across, many clubs. So Ferguson decided to get rid of the culture, and players like this. So Wallace was kind of that in between player who could do a job to get us to the next stage, like sort of as we're trying to do now. But then you kind of want world class players or better players. So he was that transitional player. If it wasn't for players like him, I remember being excited watching him down the wing, thinking who's this guy? I think a very underrated. I do think a little bit of a cult hero. I think one of those underrated players that I don't think really gets enough respect and talk about. But you know, again, for me, fantastic player. This next player, I'm going to mention him because, you know, I want to put as much respect on players who played for this club. He didn't actually play for the club. I'm going to mention him anyway. Was Brian Carey. Let's do that. Brian Carey, we got him from York City, 1989, and basically he went on loan throughout the entirety of his career. According to the stats I've got, he didn't play a single game, didn't score a single goal. So I don't know, maybe this is a pre-season friendly top. But Brian Carey, was one of those players, you know, who was bought not for big money, 117k-ish, which was quite a lot then really, and then sold to Leicester for 260k. So another one of those players that kind of, because he was bought and then sold and loaned, you know, I'm not in this list. I'm trying not to include players who kind of come up through the under 18s. You didn't really do a lot, all the ones we've got on frees and that kind of stuff. So these are players that we've bought, and then whether or not they play, then that's up to them. Next one, I do remember this player a bit, not a lot, but I do remember him a little bit. So centre midfielder, another one of our youth who come through the youth back around this time. We kind of had those, I don't want to be disrespectful, but it was a time, and I think there was definitely a disparity between the class of 92. You can see the transition, right? So you can see the transition of under 18s, under 21s before Fergie, and then you can then see post Fergie. So Fergie came into the club, and if you don't know, and this is for you Pep fans out there, Fergie came into this club and pretty much rebuilt this club, pretty much rebuilt the youth, pretty much rebuilt scouting. And where that's evident is a lot of these players that kind of came and went, like the Fergusons, the Russell Beardmore, which is the player we're going to talk about now. There are a certain standard that came through the under 21s, and you can see the transition between before Fergie and after. And before Fergie, no disrespect, because ultimately they still played for this club that I love. They were good enough to get to come up, to get through the under 18s and come up. So, you know, there is no disrespects. It was of an era, and there's a difference between these guys and the class of 92. And you can definitely see that. And then these players who started to then leave the club were the remnants of this kind of older era of player, or players that did a job for a time, and then obviously the class of 92. So he was a centre midfielder. You know, he was loaned out quite a bit. Again, I can't tell you personal stories about this guy or memories from this guy, because he wasn't a Robson, or he wasn't, you know, up there in my thinking, like a Paul Parker or an Irwin, or like he wasn't, or a Pallister or a Bruce. Like he wasn't up there. For me, he was on a peripheral really. He went on loan a couple of times. He actually come through the under 18s in 1986. So, you know, we're going back. You know, I was 3. So, you know, an academy player come through. One of the last of those sort of, you know, that old school academy player before we started to kind of try to transition over to what Fergie tried to do. He went on a free to Bournemouth, played centre midfield 72 times, scored 4 goals and assisted one. Now, I've got a video called Championship Goals 1989 to 1990, and I remember him being in that team and scoring a couple of goals there. I mean, boy, were we awful then. We were awful. That was a season that Liverpool won the title last, before they just won it in over the last 5-6 years. And I remember him being in that, and I remember him coming up with a couple of goals. So this player, again, you know, I know the name. I know him from the poster. I know him, his name. You know, imagine, you know, still played for this club 72 times. I mean, you scored 4 goals and still played for this club for 72 times, which is, you know, complete respect, you know, of an era, of a time. And you know, I just, this was the Fergie getting rid of a bygone era. And then the last one on the list is, I remember this guy because he did play quite a bit, and I just remember him just being a steady Eddie. Again, I remember watching him in a couple of games thinking he was really boring, not because he was, but just I always thought he had the most boring name and the most ordinary name. Not fair, but as a kid, that's what you do when you put your mind to it. So Lee Martin, you know, just again one of those players, you know, again a youth player, come up from the under 18s and from 86, and then was in and out the team, you know, and went to Celtic for an undisclosed fee in this season. Played 109 times. He was a left back. Played 109 times and scored 2 goals. Now, you know, playing 109 times is nothing to be sniffed at. You know, playing for a club for best part of 7 years. You know, being on loan and whatever else, but still playing 109 times. Lee Martin, I think, was a little bit of a dependable. Was dependable for Fergie. Obviously, Irwin then displaced him. You know, Irwin. Our left backs around that time, or people, you know, professing to be a left back around that time, they suffered because of Irwin. You know, they absolutely suffered basically because of Dennis Irwin. You know, he was such a good player that, you know, that then when Irwin did come into the team, you know, he automatically, you know, displaced players, these kind of youth players, which is sad, but what you know, it's just a it's just this for me is you know, when we look at now, when we look at these youth and we look at, you know, they might not be good enough. It's just been happening since here. You know, he came through 86, had a good run, like 109 games, and then Irwin joins in 1990, and that's what happened. You know, we this is a lesson to younger players now, that, you know, then when your numbers up, then that you just go and you sort of move on. You don't need to have any, you know, upset pomp or whatever else. You just go and play trade elsewhere. And this is what players. This is why I've got a lot of time for these sorts of players like Lee Martin, Ferguson as well. To be fair to him, I mean, the guy's won 2 Premier Leagues. I mean, you know, that's more than I'm at. Like, so, you know, gotta respect that. Wallace, Carey, and Beardmore, you know, these players always played for the club. You know, even though they went on loan, you know, you didn't hear them moaning and whinging. They might have moaned and whinged behind the scenes, but, you know, the fact they were still attached to this club, even though they've been loaned out, still pride to play for this club, and you didn't really hear them moan and complain. You know, so just absolute. So much time for the players around this era. And then again, so what did that do for the overall team? So the team that pretty much retained the title as such. So again, we pretty much just brought in one player, Keane, and again, in terms of a team, we still had Schmeichel in goal, Seeley, who came in the previous season, Steve Bruce, Pallister, Irwin, Paul Parker, Blackmore, Gary Neville. Then was kind of started to, not started to come into the team, but he was in the list of players. Roy Keane, Nicky Butt, Mickey Phelan. People forget about Phelan. He was a stalwart in that team. Ferguson, obviously, Ince, Robson, and Scholesy, Becks, was starting to come through. Kanchelskis as well. It's a shame some of these players. We'll talk about them when they leave, but these, he was an absolute fantastic player. Lee Sharp, the Sharpie Shuffle, Giggsy. Giggsy again. How old Giggs is that we're talking about the Premier League era, and Giggsy predates that. So we won't be talking about Giggsy for quite a long time. Eric Cantona obviously came in the previous season. McClare as well, an absolute fantastic player, really good second striker, a really good second fiddle to Mark Hughes. Mark Hughes still being there as well. Hughes was coming up for 30 around that time as well. Mark Hughes is again, I think, is another very underrated player. And then when we kind of go through a couple of more years, we can then kind of start looking at Sparky and kind of these players. Not forgetting that he went to Barcelona, Bayern Munich, and then come back to us. So, Sparky, a very underrated player. And after this season, this is kind of where we start to kind of see a little bit more activity, and some of these kind of, for me, the icons start to leave, like your Inces start to leave, your Hugheses start to leave. These guys for me were my icons, were the kind of first players that I really looked up to, and really started to hurt me when these players left, because I'd followed these players for such a long time that when your McClare's left, that I thought he was fantastic. Hughesy when he left, and then we then started to bring in the likes of Andy Cole. And that lot. So that was that really was a relatively short one, on the basis that there wasn't a lot of activity really as such. But I think that gives a good opportunity to look at maybe some of the players that have left, and maybe some of the jobs that they did. It's really important that when we look at the history of our club, to really understand this club, we acknowledge these players of the past and the job that they did. If it wasn't for them, then we probably, if they kicked off like players do now, maybe they block a play coming in, or they stunt a player coming through, and football does move on. But these are the forefathers of the club. Playing for this club for 72 games, 109 games, I'd bite somebody's arm off to play a singular game. So these guys are just phenomenal. The 94-95 season gets a little bit more exciting. Not too much, but we do make one or two signings, and some interesting things happen in there. And then 95-96 as well. This is sort of you're going to be surprised. You're going to be surprised that actually when we started bringing in players, I think this will dispel the myth of United. In the early days, they bought success, and I think watching these, I don't know about anyone else in the chat. But for me to do this, for me personally to do this, and to look back and look at the players who are in and out, it's been a real eye-opener for me, because you forget and you almost get lost in the ether, and you get lost with all the noise that United always bought 2 or 3 best players. We might have bought 1 or 2, but you can't buy. We didn't buy the success, so we didn't do what we did in later years. We don't do what City do now. We didn't do what Chelsea do now. We had a really good grounding of players, and then we added to that. And then in later years, when competitions got harder and you needed a bigger squad, then that's when we started to kind of get a bigger team together. But in the early days, you may find it a little tedious, because we didn't buy loads and loads of superstars. So I'll be trying to do one of these every other day or every day, because I love doing it. It means I get to talk about it with you great guys. Yeah, so before I go, if there's anybody in the chat watching who wants to make any comments about any of these players, do you remember any of these players? Even if you're at a different club, and do you remember this sort of era of signings, these sorts of old players that who were just kind of these like steady eddies who did a job for your club, but weren't necessarily considered like a world star, but very underrated players. So feel free to put it in chat. Feel free to put it in the comments after that. I've been JB. As I say, you're welcome here. I don't mind people from other clubs coming in here. Obviously, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about, unless it's Gyökeres, of course. But yeah, feel free, football chat, as long as we are respectful to each other. Doesn't really matter what clubs we are. Well, maybe sometimes it does, but no, as long as we are respectful to each other, we respect our own opinions. I pretty much don't mind if you take it away from the topic. I'll try and always steer it back to the topic, but I think it's really important that we engage with each other, learn from the past, sometimes even set the past straight. So Fergie does get, I think he gets a raw deal at times, saying how we bought every player like under the sun, which is not true. In the later years, potentially, but if you look at what Fergie did even throughout the years compared to what Chelsea do now, or City do now, or what Liverpool have done this season, I think you'll learn some stuff, because I have. So thank you for those who've watched. Thank you for those who get in the chat. I appreciate all the likes, the chat. It's amazing being able to talk about something that I love. Don't get to talk about it too much this in depth. This is therapy for me. This is something that I love to do, and thank you for joining me on this trip down the memory lane. And we'll be back here soon. If anything does break in anything else, I will come back on and just give you the news and give you where it comes from. So yeah, if I don't speak to you the rest of today, have a fantastic rest of your day. I'm going to pick up my children, and I'll see you in a little bit. Take care all. Have a good one.